The donor. The first thing I noticed when I woke up was the nurse's throat. Not her face, not her smile, not the gentle way she checked my vitals and told me the surgery had been a success. Her throat, the soft curve of it, the way her pulse fluttered beneath the skin when she leaned over to adjust my IV. I watched it beat. Thump, thump, thump. And something inside me stirred. Something that felt like hunger. "Mr. Reeves, can you hear me?" I blinked, looked up at her face. She was pretty, young, blonde, the kind of wholesome Midwestern pretty that belonged on a farm somewhere, not in the cardiac ward of a city hospital. Her name tag said Emily. "Yeah," I managed. My voice was sandpaper. "I can hear you. How are you feeling?" I thought about the question. How was I feeling? I'd been dying for 6 months. Cardiomyopathy, they called it. My heart muscle weakening like a battery running down. I'd been on the transplant list for 4 of those months, getting weaker every day, watching my life shrink to the size of a hospital bed. And then, 3 days ago, the call came. A donor heart, a match, a miracle. How was I feeling? "Different," I said. Emily smiled. "That's normal. A lot of transplant patients report feeling different at first. It's a big adjustment." She had no idea. I'd been a high school English teacher for 22 years, married once, divorced amicably, no kids. I lived alone in a 2-bedroom apartment with more books than furniture, and I spent my weekends grading papers and watching old movies. I was 47 years old, and before my heart started failing, the most exciting thing I'd ever done was backpack through Europe the summer after college. I was not the kind of man who noticed women's throats. I was not the kind of man who watched the way their bodies moved beneath their scrubs, cataloging the soft places, the vulnerable places, the places where... I shut my eyes, breathed deep, the new heartbeat steady in my chest, strong and sure, nothing like the fluttering weakness I'd lived with for months. What the hell is wrong with me? Emily came back an hour later with medication. I watched her set the pills on the tray, watched her fingers, delicate, precise, and I thought about what those fingers would feel like if I... "Mr. Reeves?" I jerked. She was looking at me with concern. "You okay? You went pale for a second there." "Fine." I grabbed the pills, swallowed them dry. "Just tired." She nodded, made a note on her chart, and left. I stared at the ceiling and tried not to think about the way her scrubs had tightened across her hips when she turned away. The dream started that night. I was in a basement, concrete floor, exposed pipes, a single bulb hanging from a chain. There was a woman in front of me, bound to a chair, duct tape over her mouth, mascara running down her cheeks in black rivers. She was crying, shaking, making sounds behind the tape that might have been words, might have been prayers. And I was excited. Not scared, not horrified, excited. My pulse was racing, my hands were steady, and there was a knife in my grip that felt like an extension of my arm. I'd done this before, many times, and I was going to do it again. I stepped closer. The woman's eyes went wide. She thrashed against the ropes, the chair legs scraping against concrete, and I felt a wave of satisfaction so pure it was almost religious. Yes, this is right. This is what we do. I raised the knife. I woke up screaming. The doctor said it was normal. Anesthesia dreams, they called them. Vivid, disturbing, often violent. They'd fade as the drugs worked their way out of my system. Nothing to worry about. But the dreams didn't fade. Every night, I went back to that basement. Sometimes the woman was different. Brunette instead of blonde, older or younger, dressed in a business suit or a waitress uniform. But the feeling was always the same. The hunger, the anticipation, the pure, perfect satisfaction of watching their fear. And always, always, the knife. I started staying awake as long as I could, drinking coffee until my hands shook, watching television until my eyes burned. Anything to avoid falling asleep, to avoid going back to that basement where I did terrible things and enjoyed them. It didn't help. Even awake, I was different. I'd be walking down the hospital corridor and I'd see a woman, a visitor, a nurse, a fellow patient, and my eyes would track her automatically, cataloging details I'd never noticed before. The way she walked, how aware she was of her surroundings, whether anyone was with her, whether anyone would notice if she disappeared. "She'd be easy," something whispered. "Look at her, not paying attention, keys in her hand, phone in the other. She wouldn't even see it coming." I'd shake my head, try to focus on something else, but the thoughts kept coming, intrusive, insistent, detailed. I knew things I shouldn't know, how to approach without being seen, how to control without leaving marks, how to make it last. I was losing my mind, or something worse. They discharged me after 2 weeks. I went home to my apartment, my books, my quiet life. I thought about maybe being back in familiar surroundings would help, would remind me of who I was, would silence the voice in my head that whispered terrible things. It got worse. There was a woman in my building, 3rd floor, apartment 3C. I'd seen her 100 times before the surgery, in the elevator, at the mailbox, passing in the hallway. I'd never really noticed her. She was pretty, sure, but so were a lot of people. She was just my neighbor. Now I couldn't stop watching her. I knew her schedule. She left for work at 7:15 every morning, came home around 6:30. She went to the gym on Tuesdays and Thursdays, groceries on Saturday mornings. She lived alone, no boyfriend, no roommate. No one would notice if she didn't come home one night. I knew which window was her bedroom. I knew that she slept with it cracked open, even in winter. I knew these things because I'd been watching, standing in the shadows across the street at midnight, timing the gaps in foot traffic, noting the blind spots in the building's security cameras. And the worst part, the part that made me want to tear this new heart out of my chest with my bare hands, was that I enjoyed it. The planning, the patience, the slow, careful construction of a hunt. Something was very, very wrong with me. I went back to the hospital. Dr. Marchetti was the surgeon who'd saved my life, a small, precise man with kind eyes and steady hands. He'd done over 300 heart transplants. He'd seen everything. He'd never seen anything like me. "Let me understand," he said, leaning back in his chair. "You're having violent dreams, intrusive thoughts, and you believe these are coming from the donor heart?" I know how it sounds. I was gripping the armrest of my chair so hard my knuckles were white. But I'm not making this up. I'm not crazy. Something is wrong. Something came with this heart. "Mr. Reeves, I was a teacher," my voice cracked. "I taught The Great Gatsby and To Kill a Mockingbird, and I spent my summers reading on the beach. I've never hurt anyone in my life. I never wanted to hurt anyone. And now I can't stop thinking about..." I couldn't say it, couldn't put it into words. "Please, can you put me back on the list? Find me another heart?" Dr. Marchetti's expression shifted from concern to something closer to pity. "The heart is a muscle," he said gently. "It pumps blood. That's all it does. It doesn't contain memories or personality or whatever you think is happening to you. What you're experiencing is psychological, not physiological. The trauma of major surgery, the medications, the adjustment to a new life. These things can cause significant mental health challenges. It's not psychological. It's the heart. Hearts don't have memories, Mr. Reeves." He reached for a prescription pad. "I'm going to refer you to a colleague of mine. Dr. Fisher is excellent. She specializes in post-surgical adjustment issues. I don't need a psychiatrist. I need a new heart. I'm sorry. And he did sound sorry, genuinely sorry. But what you're asking for is medically impossible. You're healthy now. Your new heart is functioning perfectly. There's no indication for another transplant. He held out the referral. I stared at it for a long moment. Then I stood up and walked out. I found him 3 weeks later. The hospital wouldn't tell me anything about the donor. Privacy laws, they said, as if the dead had any use for privacy. But I'd been watching people for weeks now, learning to read them, learning to find the gaps in their defenses. A sympathetic records clerk, a bottle of wine, a few well-placed questions. The donor's name was John Doe, 47, male, mid-40s, found dead in a motel room off I-95, apparent aneurysm, no identification, no wallet, no phone, just a duffel bag full of cash, and a car registered to a woman who'd been reported missing 6 months earlier. The police were still investigating. They thought he might be connected to other disappearances, women who'd vanished without a trace over the past decade, scattered across 3 states, bodies never found. They thought he might be a serial killer. They just couldn't prove it. I sat in my apartment staring at the printed news articles spread across my coffee table, and I knew they were right. He was a killer, a careful, patient, experienced killer who'd hunted for years without getting caught. And when his heart finally gave out in that motel room, when the paramedics cracked his chest and pulled the organ out, they'd put it inside me. His heart was beating in my chest. His hunger was gnawing at my brain. And his memories, God help me, his memories were becoming mine. The dreams got clearer. I saw their faces now, all of them. Women from truck stops and rest areas, from late-night diners and empty parking lots. Women who trusted the wrong smile, got into the wrong car, made the wrong decision at the wrong moment. He'd been doing this for years, decades maybe, and he was good at it. Patient, methodical, never rushed. He'd watch them for days before he moved, learn their patterns, find the gaps in their lives where no one would notice them missing. Sound familiar? In the dreams, I felt what he felt. The anticipation as he followed them, the electric thrill when he finally made contact. The peace. That was the worst part. The peace. When they stopped screaming and just looked at him with those empty eyes. He loved them in his way. That's what I understood now. He didn't hate his victims. He loved them. Loved the way they fought, the way they cried, the way they finally accepted what was happening. He loved every single one of them. And now, so did I. I tried to fight it. I really did. I stopped going outside, stopped watching the woman in 3C. I threw away every knife in my kitchen, every sharp object I could find. I sat in my apartment with the blinds drawn and the doors locked, trying to starve the thing inside me. But the hunger didn't fade. It grew. I started seeing her in my dreams. Not the women from before, not this woman, but her, the woman from 3C. I watched myself follow her from the gym, watched myself wait in the shadows outside her building, watched myself slip through the cracked bedroom window while she slept. And I woke up, happy. That's when I knew I was lost. Her name was Sarah. I learned it from her mailbox. Sarah Marsh, apartment 3C. She worked at a marketing firm downtown, had a cat named Biscuit, and called her mother every Sunday afternoon. She'd been single for about a year, bad breakup from what I could gather, and she spent most of her evenings alone, watching reality TV and drinking wine. She was lonely. I understood lonely. In another life, my old life, the one before the surgery, I might have asked her out, might have stammered through an awkward elevator conversation, might have suggested coffee sometime, I'd always been shy around women, never knew what to say, never felt confident enough to make a move. I wasn't shy anymore. I watched her for 2 more weeks, learned her patterns until they felt like my own, noted the rhythms of the building, the gaps in attention, the moments when no one was watching. I assembled a kit. Rope, tape, tools I didn't remember buying but knew exactly how to use. The old me would have been horrified. The old me was still in there somewhere. I could feel him screaming, pounding against the walls of my skull, begging me to stop. But his voice was getting fainter every day, drowned out by the steady drumbeat of the heart that wasn't mine. Thump, thump, thump. She won't even see it coming. It was a Thursday when I decided. She'd gone to the gym as usual, come home as usual, showered, and changed into sweatpants and an oversized t-shirt. I watched her through the window. I'd found a spot across the street where the streetlight didn't reach, and I felt the familiar anticipation building in my chest. Tonight. The voice wasn't mine. It was his, the donor, the killer whose heart pumped my blood and whose memories filled my dreams. But it didn't matter anymore whose voice it was. We wanted the same thing now. We wanted Sarah Marsh. I went back to my apartment, laid out the kit on my bed, checking each item with hands that didn't shake. I'd been fighting this for months, fighting myself, fighting the heart, fighting the terrible truth of what I'd become. I was tired of fighting. The old me had one last argument, one final, desperate plea. You were a teacher. You taught children about right and wrong. You believed in goodness, in kindness, in the fundamental decency of human beings. That man is still inside you. He doesn't have to die. But he was already dead. He'd died on an operating table 6 months ago, when a team of surgeons cut out his failing heart and replaced it with something that worked much better. Something strong and steady and relentless. Something that knew exactly what it wanted and how to get it. I picked up the bag. I checked the time, 11:47 p.m. She'd be asleep by now, deep asleep. The kind that comes after a long day and half a bottle of wine. I walked to the door. The old me made one last sound, something between a sob and a scream, and then went quiet. I stepped into the hallway. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as I walked toward the stairwell. My footsteps were soft, measured, automatic. I'd done this before. Not me, him. But the muscle memory was there, coded into every beat of the heart that pulsed in my chest. The stairwell was empty. It was always empty at this hour. I climbed to the 3rd floor, paused at the door, listened. Nothing. I stepped into the hallway. Apartment 3C was at the end, past the elevator, past the recycling bins, past the point of no return. I walked. Her door had a deadbolt, but deadbolts were easy. I'd practiced on my own door until I could do it in under 30 seconds. The pins clicked, the cylinder turned, and I was inside. The apartment was dark, quiet. I could hear the hum of her refrigerator, the distant sounds of the city through the cracked bedroom window. I could smell her, shampoo and wine and something floral, something soft. I moved through the living room, past the couch where she watched her shows, past the kitchen where she fed her cat, toward the bedroom where she slept. The door was open. She was there, curled on her side, face soft with sleep. The blankets had slipped down, revealing the curve of her shoulder, the vulnerable line of her neck. I stood in the doorway and watched her breathe. The heart beat steady in my chest, strong, sure, ready. Yes, this is right. This is what we do. I stepped into the room, and somewhere deep inside me, in a place that used to be called a conscience. The last ember of the man I'd been flickered once and went out. Thump, thump, thump.